Good afternoon, Fran. We are excited to bring you another episode as part of our Horizon 2020 initiative, focusing on fairness and AI-driven foundations to combat multidimensional discrimination.
Okay, so today we have a special guest researcher with us, Dr. Víctor López. He is an assistant professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona in Science Education. His research ranges from physics education to the use of educational technologies for science education. However, since the emergence of AI, artificial intelligence tools in education, he has also become interested in how we can make use of these tools. So, Victor, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. It is a pleasure to share your project, this initiative about disseminating different ideas related with education and artificial intelligence. And as we are also friends, and so it's also a pleasure to meet together and to join to discuss about this interesting topic as it is science education and artificial intelligence.
Okay, so let's dive right in. First of all, we would like to know a bit more about your field, science education. Could you explain to us the focus of this discipline? What are its main contributions to society?
Wow, I think it's hard to define in short time what is science education, but science education, let's say that is a field, a research field, and also a implementation action field that exists since the second part of the 20th century. It starts maybe at the 60s, but it consolidates as a field of research during the 80s, and is mainly focused on understanding how people, especially how students learn science, and also how teachers teach science. I think that we will talk later about that, but science education, let's say that it has like two phases. On the one hand, what about teaching? And the other, what about learning? And we will discuss it because then when talking about artificial intelligence, we will see that there is also this double question about what about teaching and what about learning. But anyways, in order to summary, let's say that science education is the field that focuses in the understanding of how people, especially students from 0 to, let's say, university, how they learn not only scientific concepts, but how they engage in scientific processes, in scientific practices. It also investigates about the role of identities in science understanding, the role of social emotional factors, the role of students' misconceptions and the students' difficulties for reasoning as a scientist. And it also focuses on different strategies, teaching strategies, like, for example, the role of experimental works in the laboratories, in schools, the role of teaching learning materials, the role of instruction and teachers' explanations, and let's say the wide variety of teaching strategy that exist. And some of them, it includes also the role of ICT tools, the role of the digital technology, but not always, not because science education investigates, for instance, oral interactions within the classroom. It investigates drawings, handmade drawings. It investigates also about trip fields in the field. So let's say when a school goes to the forest just to discover the nature, or when they go to science museum, for instance. So it is a very broad field that includes a lot of approaches.
Wow, Victor, thank you. It's amazing
Yeah.
how you managed to summarize the whole discipline of science
It's hard to
education.
summarize. I think that actually, if anyone wants to know what is science education, I would recommend them just, for example, to get into a website, for example, of ESERA, that is one of the most important international conferences, and then there you will see the strands of the conference. That is like the hot topics. What is people talking about? And then you will see like which is the current trends in science education.
Well, for all the audience, you go back to, well, you can visit this ESERA webpage conference, which is the European Community of Science Education, right? Yeah, so moving a bit towards the next question. Victor, we know that you've been doing some research about educational technologies used for science education. So I would like you to explain to us how these technologies used for education have been evolving over the years. And are these technologies anyhow comparable to the AI tools that we are currently using in science education?
Okay, first of all, let's say that beyond science education, there is a broader field that is named educational technology. But this field that is usually located in schools of education from different European or international, all of the world faculties, in many universities, there are groups of research focused on understanding the role that technology plays in education. But in my case, I focus my research on the role of specific uses for science education. Let's give you an example. Let's imagine a classroom management system, a digital, virtual classroom management system that allows teachers, for instance, uploading materials. It allows, for instance, providing with links to different materials that the students should read. Students can write their answers there. Students can provide, teacher can provide feedback and give answer to every specific question posed by students. When we are talking about this kind of systems, for instance, or also, for example, the role of mobile phones for promoting classroom interaction, I'm not really interested on that. Well, I'm interested, but as a user, but not, I have never made research on these, let's say, generic ICT tools for education. But my interest, my specific interest, is about the role of those ICT tools that have a key role on promoting student scientific practices. And I will mainly focus on three kind of tools that I would say like my top three interesting tools. Of course, another person can have a different opinion, and I perfectly will discuss about other ICT tools, but I will focus on three that I think after, let's say, 15 years of experience of using them, not only making research, but also in classrooms. I have been also secondary school teacher, and I use them with my secondary school students. First of all, I would like to talk about data loggers. That is different devices that we can use in order to gather scientific data from scientific experiments. For example, let's say a thermometer that connected to a computer in which you have a real-time graphic on the evolution of the temperature of a system. Let's imagine that we are in a group of, let's say, 13 years old student, and we are discussing about which bottle of water gets hotter or colder depending of the interaction with the environment, okay? So if we can plot in a simple graphic the real-time evolution of the temperature, it allows to teacher engage students in a discussion. Why do you think the temperature increase? Why do you think the temperature decrease? Or let's imagine that instead of having a temperature sensor, you have a CO2 concentration sensor in which we can discuss about photosynthesis, or for example, we have a force meter, no? a data logger that measures real-time forces, so we can talk about physics interactions, or well, there are let's say a lot of different these kind of devices. For example, there is they're rated with electricity, with different chemical compositions like O2 concentration, pH values. Well, there is a wide variety. Why I think this has an added value for science education? Because it allows students to obtain values, to obtain data that could not be obtained without these devices. And so it allows students to engage in scientific reasonings, for example, making predictions and then comparing the results with the predictions, or for example, discussing if the results obtained were the expected ones, if all the groups obtained the same results, etc., etc. On the second hand, since I have few time, I will try to summarize it as much as I can. I would talk about simulations. In this case, when talking about simulations, we are talking about small computer programs made by experts. Sometimes they are scientific companies or scientific or educational companies. Sometimes are the teachers, the science teachers who build their own small simulations that allow representing scientific phenomena, and students can modify the variables and also making experiments. But in this case, the students are not making real experiments. This is a virtual experiment. It means that it always will work as expected by a surrounding scientific model. But let's imagine, for instance, I don't know, you have an ecosystem in which you have rabbits and wolves, and you modify the rate of birth of rabbits. So you see how the graphic of rabbit populations increase, then you introduce a predator and the number of preys decrease. So students can make their own virtual experiments. Or let's imagine, for instance, you have a simulation about a chemical reaction in which you modify the concentration of one of the components, and then you see real time also how the reaction changes over time. And it is also a very interactive way to engage students, as I said before, in scientific practice, making hypotheses, making questions about how can explain that this occurs, analyzing the results obtained that you can see on the screen, also making conclusions and obtaining conclusions from the experiments. And I think I'm very fan and very supporting always, for example, the PHIT platform, in which you can have found, I don't know, at least 50 different simulations. I use it very often with my students, and I think it's an interesting way. Of course, it can be combined. For example, before we were talking about real experiments with data loggers, and now we are talking about virtual experiments. I think that it's nice and interesting from the educational point of view, combine them to show students that sometimes we have to deal with real and hands-on processes and phenomena, and sometimes you can do it with the screen, but not always. Finally, I would like to talk about a third typology that I think is less common in schools, that are those computational modeling programs or languages that allow students only making experiments, but also expressing their models, their mental models. In science education, one of the most common words is talking about models. We talk always about models. We talk about models, for instance, to talk about what are students thinking, but also when we talk about how can we explain that something occurs. When we are talking about students' ways of thinking, we usually use the word mental models. And it's very hard for teachers to force the students to express their models. I don't think that education is only about receiving external information and external explanations, but trying to make your own explanation and trying to define which rules allow explaining a phenomena. For example, let's imagine that instead of giving students a already built model about ecology, about preys and predators, let's imagine that we ask students, how could you build your own computer-based model in which you have to define some rules that represent the evolution of the population of preys according to the number of predators? And sometimes you can do it with easy and simple everyday life tools, like, for example, with Excel file. There was one very well-known and very powerful teacher in secondary school that unfortunately he passed away 2 years ago, Jordi Domènech. that I found once. I went to see what he was doing in school, and he was engaging students only with an Excel file, trying to represent the evolution of the COVID virus pandemic. So how the pandemic was spread in a community, defining some rules with Excel file, and students had to define their own rules. Well, I think that every time one individual gets infected, then there is a possibility that he also infect 3 more people. How can I express it with Excel file? So what students were doing was really authentic, because it was very similar to what professional scientists were doing in their labs, in their computer clusters, when many people is working, defining very complex models. And in this case, it was like one teacher in one school with 20 students using a very simple program, but the way of reasoning was quite similar. And I think that this also provides an opportunity. For example, I don't know, physics education, we usually focus on the equations that we already know for describing movement. But one activity that I like very much is try to build your own program in order to make an object, a virtual object, move every time faster. And students never have heard about, let's imagine 14 years old students who never listen about uniform linear motion equation. It's like, okay, in every step it has to move in every. So we start making reasonings like, for example, okay, moving faster means that in every step the step is longer. But how can I define a step longer? Or maybe I have to say that every step takes less time to occur. And both are correct. And so students start discussing about how to represent mathematically the acceleration. But they have never used, like, let's say, like the equations that they will find in the books. But they have to create their own equations. And it allows a scenario in which the kind of interactions that you can find there are quite authentic from the point of view of what a good science class should be like. Because I really believe that a good science class is not only about, okay, I'm a student, I just sit, I listen to my teacher because the teacher is the one who has the knowledge, and I just open my ears and start receiving knowledge. I don't think that education works like that. Well, education can work like that, but not learning works like that. We know, and there is a lot of research that learning means being able to act in specific situations. And the way in which you act, in the way, for example, in which you make decisions, in the way in which you talk, you participate in the different processes of a community, is how people learn. We all learn about engaging in a community. For example, if I learn, I don't know, if I have to learn how to cook, if I want to learn cooking, I would start cooking, not only receive lectures about how to cook. I will have to cook. So students have to make science. A science classroom is about making science. And that's why these 3 specific tools that I try to describe shortly before are the 3 optimal for promoting this kind of engaging in making science: data loggers, simulations, and computational modeling, let's say.
Okay. And Victor, I have a question. So we've been talking about IC tools for scientific practices to make science in classrooms, but would you say that these technologies are comparable to the AI tools currently used in science education? Are they different?
I'm trying to make a question since artificial intelligence appeared 2 years ago. There is a question that comes to my mind many times, that is, which is the specificities of artificial intelligence in science education? And I'm not still Sure, which is the answer. Let's say, let's start talking about, if you want, about artificial intelligence. I think that EA is like it's a very deep change that I'm not sure if we really understand it yet, but I think that it's supposed to make a very strong crisis in education, because it's not only about how to teach. I think it's even deeper. It's about what to teach and why to teach. So it's about what is really important that the students are able to do, to understand, to reason, even to memorize, if you want, to memorize or to bear in mind, let's say, in an era, in a world in which many intellectual process are made by, let's say, machines. I don't know. I think that you also have this feeling, but I have the feeling when ChatGPT appeared in November 22, I think that something in my expectations were really strongly changed, because in my mind it was like, okay, machines will make like practical work, like for instance, packaging, cooking, building or manufacturing, crafting different, I don't know, objects with different materials. But I was not really expecting that machines would make the more intellectual tasks. I don't know if you have ever discussed in previous episode. I assume this is a very typical debate about that. So we all thought that we would think that robots would act, but actually what is happening is the opposite. Because at this moment, it's easier for a machine, for example, to create a website, or to generate a new song, or to generate a new picture, but not to, I don't know, take care of a plant, take care of a garden, build a house, manufacturing a shoe, or a jacket, or any piece of clothes. So it's like quite what? So it means that now in the hierarchy, intellectual hierarchy, are machines above the humans? No, this is a debate that we all had, and this debate forces us to discuss. So what is important? For example, I don't know. There are many jobs are having a debate like now. For example, yesterday I was having a debate with a colleague that said, well, even if, for example, in the field of translations, linguistic translations, no? On the one hand, at this moment, we have very powerful programs that allow making very simple and instantaneous translations. But on the other hand, there is a lot of people that says, I don't want that a machine really gathers the data of my conversation. For example, let's imagine we are talking about secret meetings between different international leaders, and they are discussing about the peace of the war in a conflict. Okay, so maybe some people would say, no, I don't want that a machine, because I don't know who's recording this conversation. I want a human there. Or for example, about music, for example, no, maybe it's not so important now who is composing the song, but who is playing and who is singing. So that the face-to-face interactions between a human and another human are like we are rediscovering things that cannot be made by a computer. For example, a digital poster, for instance, can be done by a computer, by a water paint picture made by a person that is there observing a landscape and gathering, depicting the information from a landscape in a piece of paper. This is very human. And I think that we are now in this debate about what is human, what has added value, what has not added value anymore. And there are some jobs that maybe they will have not value anymore, but there are other activities that will like appear again as activities that maybe they were like considered like a less important, and now will become one again more and more important. So within this debate, that is a very hard debate, I don't know which is the role of ICT in science education. Why? Let me say, how are at this moment scientists using ICTs? No, I think that this is the question that we should try to answer. So, for example, there is something that, of course, many scientists since 2 years ago are using, for example, for writing papers. So there is a crisis of the how to communicate the results of a research. No, we had like a consensus that making research was about publishing in important journals, and the process of writing was like one of the top 5 skills that a scientist should have. And it also was very important, the linguistic issues, because, for example, it is well known that English speakers, researchers had much more opportunities for publishing than, for example, non-English speaker researchers. So what will happen with that in the future? What about, for example, some years ago, there was like a fashion of open science. And in this open science, one of the most hot topic, maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, was the citizen science. Citizen science was engaging. There was like the idea that if we engage citizens, lay citizens, in analyzing data, the workforce for making science advance will be bigger. No? 10 years ago, there were some international scientific projects in which there were, I don't know, 1,000 volunteers that analyzed pictures made with a telescope, or pictures made about body tissues in order to identify cancer cells, damaged cells. And maybe it's like, wow, but now there is artificial intelligence that can make this process even better than scientists. So I don't have the answer. I just raise questions like, do we have to use the telescope with our eyes anymore, or we have to let artificial intelligence using the telescope and they will better identify new clusters of galaxies in the future? Or I don't know, when a person goes to the doctor and he or she has to obtain results from a doctor, from someone with a medical experience that allow analyzing the results of a blood analysis. So we need someone there, or maybe an artificial intelligence can better give diagnosis from blood analysis. Well, I think that we have this debate, and this debate, I think we need some perspective, because I recognize that at this moment we are teaching something for a science that is not existing anymore. So I think that we still have to discuss with all the community about which is the future of science. And when defining the future of science, then we have to make again the question, which is the role of science education in society? Because, for example, I don't know this debate, but this is a debate that affects many aspects of teaching learning processes. What about mathematics? I think that the students have to, instead of making, for example, maybe 40 years ago, the first, let's say, goal in mathematics was that people were able to make very long calculations, because there were no other opportunities. But at this moment, everyone agrees that, okay, we don't make long calculations with a machine that helps you to make the calculations. But we have to help students to develop critical reasoning. We have to develop students' capacity of define which is the best strategy, depending on the kind of problems you have. So these kind of skills are those that we have to decide as a community which are the most important skills. In my opinion, it will have to be a combination, and I'm trying to summarize it with a very simple, let's say, conclusions that I would say. On the one hand, I think it's important that some key ideas in science will have to be taught always, independent if we have artificial intelligence or not. For example, the main ways of understanding the world that each scientific discipline provides. I will give you an example. In the field of physics, that is my field, there are like 3-4 simple concepts. Well, they are not simple, but let's say key concepts that will have to be understood by students, because it's not a matter, it's not just gather information. Maybe it's not necessary to know which is the distance between the moon and the earth. This is something that you can find, this information. I'm not sure if you have to memorize this information, but understanding gravity as interaction between two bodies is not just a fact. It's not just an information. It's not something that you will find in Wikipedia. It's something that you have to really understand. And understanding this idea, understanding that physics understand phenomena by means of thinking which are the interactions between the bodies. And sometimes these interactions has to do with forces. Sometimes with the interaction has to do with energy transfer. Sometimes this interaction has to do with light and shadows. Sometimes this interaction has to do with I don't know, for example, the source where the sound comes from and who receives the sound, or who sends the light, who receives the light. But it's a matter of understanding interactions between bodies. For example, in chemistry, the approach is quite different. Let's say that chemistry is about understanding the composition of the matter, no? Which is the composition of the substances. The substances are made of what? At which level do we understand the matter? We talk about particles, we talk about atoms, molecules, and understanding that real life objects are composed by very, very, very tiny particles that we cannot see. This idea, I think that will always be important, because it is not information that you can find on internet. It's a way, it's like a glasses that you put yourself in order to understand the world in a very specific way. So, in my opinion, these key scientific idiosyncrasies are those that will always be important in school, because it's not just about reading a book or listening a YouTuber that talks about science. It's something that has to be built in a school. And on the other hand, then there are those, let's say, soft skills, or skills that are not easy to really teach with one specific activity, but are those skills that have to be developed along the school period from 0 to, let's say, 16, 18, depending on the educational system, that has to do with providing students with the ability to act in the current world. For example, I think it's very important that the skills related with critical thinking. No, we are in a world, since some years ago, we are all talking about a post-truth era. And in this post-truth era, we are every day receiving hundreds of informations that are fake news, or informations that are have a lot of bias. And for this reason, I think it's important that students develop this critical thinking. I think there are also some other soft skills, like, for instance, the ability of understanding the context in which you are, try to have empathy with other individuals, try to collaborate. And I think that these two main educational goals, on the one hand, the key ideas, and the other, the general skills, that will always be important in school. So they will never disappear, or they should never disappear, because it's not about, okay, now we have already artificial intelligence, so we don't need to be critical anymore. No, we have to be especially more critical because of the existence of artificial intelligence. We don't have to dominate some simple key ideas because we have artificial intelligence. No, we have to dominate those simple key ideas, because those are the ideas that allow us to understand the world in a specific way that has to do with science. maybe arts or humanities, they have another ways of understanding the world. But those ways of understanding the world that comes from science are always important to be there in school.
Wow, Victor, what an answer! Now, now,
My best.
now I would. So we've been talking about the role of AI in society, in science education, etc. But now I want you to. Now I would like you to put your hat as a pre-service teacher trainer, but also as a secondary teacher. So.
Yes.
Being focused in these roles that you have, do you have any specific concern that you would like to share about the use of AI? That is the use of AI in schools, high schools, and at the university level with pre-service teachers.
Yes. Yes. Well, I, at this moment, I have let's say 2 concerns. The first one is that I'm really surprised that many people is acting as if nothing was happening. It really surprised me. Last week, I made one survey to primary school teachers, and most of them recognize that they have never used it for educational purposes. It's like, for me, it's hard to understand because, well, I recognize I use it nearly every day, even for writing a mail or, I don't know, for providing feedback into a student with developed and let's say soft language. But many primary school teachers said, no, I have never used it. I don't need to use it. It's like, okay, I perfectly understand your point of view, but I was really surprised because it's like if nothing was happening. And it concerns me a little bit because if you think that nothing is happening, I think that you are not you are not preparing students for the future that they will find out of school. So artificial intelligence is there. If school is not acting in how to use it and how to take advantage of it, I think that then they will finish their school period, and so they will be completely novices and literacy people and literated people regarding, in this case, artificial intelligence. And the other concern, so on the one hand, I have the concern about that many people is acting as if nothing was happening. And I think that they are not involved in discussions about how to better use it, about how to take profit of that, identifying the limitations, the risk, discussing about the opportunities. But it's just something that is happening there, but it's not about me. No, but you're a teacher, both primary and secondary school teachers. My second concern, I would say, that is a simplified approach that is only about a matter of cheating and fighting against cheating. And I think that is very poor debate, very low quality debate, because, well, for example, I every day discuss with teachers. I'm really concerned because now students can cheat. Well, yes, students can cheat, but this is not the debate. So I see, of course, it's evident. If you are asking students, make me a 3 pages essay about, I don't know, industrial revolution in the 19th century, it is very easy to be done. So then the discussion is, okay, how can I assure that the students don't copy? They don't use ChatGPT. I will ask students to make it to write with their hands instead of have a computer essay, a computer text. But then students make the computer text and they copy it at hands. So trying to only be worried about cheating and trying to find strategies to skip cheating of students. Cheating, I means that everything that has to do with that artificial intelligence is making a task that you are supposed to do without it. This is cheating, copying, solving a problem, giving you the results of a the statement, mathematical statement with some data that you have to provide a result with the solution. And then, so now we have to discuss how to overcome this stupid debate about, well, students are cheating, how can I make, how I can put more and more barriers to avoid cheating. This is not the debate. The debate is how can I integrate it in order to that we already have this answer. We can have the answer provided by the artificial intelligence, and how I can get advantage of this answer. For example, I will give you 3 examples of activities that I make with my own students. Okay. For example, secondary school students, I give them a statement, simple statement, in which you have, for example, chemical reaction, and you have different masses from the initial substances, and then you have to calculate which is the masses of the final substances, and then you have to take into account the concentration, the stoichiometric relationships between the components, and the so typical chemical statement in chemistry. So we ask students, we have a group of teachers in which we debate about the role of artificial intelligence in education. And we decided last year to design an activity in which we had the statement, but then we ask students, okay, try to solve by yourself, and then ask ChatGPT to give you an answer. Try to compare them, which is better. And then the discussion, okay, what better means? Better means shorter, or better means longer, because maybe you can have it with very simple steps, or you can have the details about the explanations. Why now you are calculating the temperature? I'm calculating the temperature because it allows me then to define the pressure of the gas involved in the chemical reaction. So instead of just learning how to follow step by step, which is the good calculation of a solution of the problem, that maybe the final result was 25 grams of CO2. This is like the final results. But we are debating with the students about the process, which is the better strategy. Or I realize that I calculate that and I really don't need it for the problem. And maybe ChatGPT make it better. Or sometimes they recognize that ChatGPT has some mistakes. It also has mistakes. So we have to discuss it with the students. Okay. Now I am this is as a secondary school teacher, but for example, as a university teacher that now I'm teaching to future teachers. For example, last week we were discussing with the students. We had a lecture about learning sequences and yes, let's say the learning cycle. We use in science education, we usually talk a learning cycle in which we start by exploring students' previous ideas, then we introduce new ideas, we structure them, we apply new context. So there are like canonical phases that we usually use them to sequence our teaching learning activity. We first make this activity, we make this other activity, then we make this activity, and then we make this activity. This is very common in science education, and I was teaching it to my students. Okay, so I was explaining them how to define their future sequences as a teachers. Okay, so I was teaching them how to design instructional materials. And then one of the activity was the following. Okay, ask to ChatGPT about an instructional sequence of activities. And I gave them the scenario. Okay, you have to ask ChatGPT to have a 6 hours lesson plan about this topic. For example, about, I don't know, biodiversity, or about gravity, or about, I don't know, the Roman Empire. Okay, and then those teachers, the first action was about asking ChatGPT, which is the proposal it makes, no? And then the answer of ChatGPT, yes, of course, here you have the answer. And then ChatGPT starts writing and gives you a list of 6 activities that compose a full lesson plan. And then the debate is about, okay, did ChatGPT give you a sequence of activities that corresponds with your expectations? And it corresponds with the theory we have debated in the lecture, because in the lecture I asked them, okay, all the activities should start by making a student questions about their previous knowledge on the topic. So the debate with my students was, did ChatGPT include this kind of activities at the beginning of the sequence? Yes or not? Wow, yes, but I realized that they gave, I don't know, for example, one group realized that ChatGPT gave very surface-based, very surface or simple questions. It didn't provide questions to go in depth about what do students really think about this topic. And so we start discussing about that. Or we also realize that usually ChatGPT doesn't gives you the last activity at the end of the, let's say, lesson plan, doesn't give students like application activities, activities that allow to apply in a different context, because it understands, ChatGPT, of course, it has been enriched, but reading hundreds of documents, educational documents, not all of them follow a coherent instructional order, let's say, and we could discuss about that with the students. My students now, they are future teachers. Why I made this activity? Because I think that it's important that they include ChatGPT as a tool in their future teaching practice, and they will have to create or to define short teaching plans with a sequence of activities. So trying to reflect about if ChatGPT helps us as teachers to make this process of planification, I think that it was very enriching for my students, because they could realize that, wow, now I realize that I can not only use ChatGPT by giving one prompt and receiving but one answer, but by tuning this answer with more prompts that modulates their answer, that improves some aspects. You can now focus on one specific part. So they felt, when I was talking with them, it's like, wow, I think it's the first time I really understand how to use it in an effective way. And I think that this is one of the challenges we have as a teachers of future teachers.
Yeah. In fact, I did a similar activity. Well, I have a workshop with a similar activity. And do you know that? So the background of these pre-service teachers were a science background, for example, physics, chemistry, etc. So they didn't know a lot about didactics. And do you know the most common answer that I received? That the teaching and learning sequence that was developed by the ChatGPT or Copilot was very good, because they could have designed in exactly the same structure, in exactly the same order. So for me, the key element here is the didactic knowledge that they have, because if they don't have that didactic knowledge, they cannot critically evaluate it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that
yeah.
Develop this criteria for teachers to know if what in every specific moment, if what they are receiving from a large language model, if this is, it has an added value, if it has quality or not.
Yeah.
It's kind of debate.
Yeah.
Debates that we are trying to promote in the faculties of education.
Yeah.
But as I said before, I have many doubts and many questions that I don't have any answer. I'm just to share with you my experience, but actually,
of course, yeah.
I still have many doubts and many questions not answered yet.
We have a final question for you, Victor, because we've been basically focused on large language models in terms of ChatGPT or how can they make sense of that. But there are many other tools like personalized learning tools or recommendation systems, right, that provide you specific activities according to your alleged needs, right? I'd like to know a bit what should we expect a little bit about the future? Because in a way, all these tools are kind of having this implicit message of learning can happen faster, and we can improve the way you learn in a more efficient way. And this is kind of the terms that are normally used around these tools. What do you think? Which are your reactions when you hear this kind of a statement or um, advertising, maybe?
Well, this is the debate of will artificial intelligence act as a teacher, so it will like we don't need teachers anymore because we discussed some minutes ago about the role of the translators, for example, or the painters or the web designers. So this debate also concerns teachers. No, are teachers in the future? For example, there are some popular apps. Let's say that one of the most popular one is Duolingo. I think that everyone knows it. It's very effective for providing you with some tips, some mechanism for improving language. But on the one hand, everyone agrees that in order to really master a language, mastering a language is not only about knowing its grammar, but also being able to communicate in a real situation. And I think it's a matter of combination, as I said to you before. I think that there will be tools in the future that will facilitate like some mechanical process of learning. For example, I don't know, I'm thinking in terms of recently we have a local journal in science education in Catalan, and we recently published a paper in which one secondary school teacher was showing a new app made with artificial intelligence about chemical nomenclature. Okay, and it helps the students, and it's like a game, a gamified interface in which you all the time, depending on your difficulties for giving the chemical names of every single compound, it provides you an individualized pathway of learning. Okay, and it combines organic chemistry with inorganic chemistry, and it provides like a very nice structure of pathways that you should follow in order to mastering yourself to become expert. But once again, this is not. This is a very specific part of chemistry. It's the part of chemistry that has to do of translating a name into a formula, but it is not thinking as a chemistry it's not about thinking in terms of how chemistry understands the world, as I said before. So I think it's a matter of combining both. On the one hand, with example of language, we could say on the one hand, you can improve your fluency by using an app, Duolingo. It's very useful. But on the other hand, in order to really mastering a language, you will have to talk with other people, with real people. You will not become expert in a language just talking with robots, because it will never be the same. The humans, we are different than machines. And that's why every time there are more and more communities that just meet in order to talk in English. There are many, this is a typical activity that you can find, for example, for social activities that you can find in a cultural center in every neighborhood, in every village, no? That you will have, for example, yoga and English classes, in which it's not about learning the grammar. At this moment, well, I'm not expert on language education, but when I go to the many places, I see that there are conversations in English, a group of conversation in English. There is not anymore like teachers that they teach grammar, but they promote conversations. Why? Because grammar, you can already learn grammar with an application. For example, music. No, there are some applications and some softwares that will, using by the taking advantage of the artificial intelligence, will help you play music. But if you really want to experience music, it's not only about using an app that helps you to play the piano, but it's all then playing it with someone else that is listening to you, go to listen how other people plays the piano. And this combination of really sophisticated and AI-based tools with face-to-face interactions between humans. So in the case of science, I think, I expect, this is my prediction, that in the future we'll have like this combination. On the one hand, if you want to master the languages of science in order to make better calculations, to make, I don't know, no? Chemical formulation, etc., you will use this kind of programs. But on the other hand, you will need discussions, phenomena, real phenomena. This is something very important in science. Science is about understanding the world. So you have to see the moon and ask yourself question, why do we see the moon in this way? And you have to see a plant and that is growing in your garden, and you may question, or you will see a bird in the forest, and you will listen how it's singing, no? It's singing, but the sound the bird is doing, and then you will make questions about how this bird interacts with other birds. Those questions, those authentic scientific questions that are the basis of the scientific advancement, the questions, you will never, I think we will never have an artificial intelligence tool that make the questions you need to get interested on understanding the world. Those questions will always come from being there, being in the nature, being in the lab, being in a community, because it's not something that you just make yourself. It's something that you make to another person. You are both observing the moon or the birds of the plants. Well, this is like
okay. Yeah. I think, Mikael, you don't have any more questions, right? I don't have either. So, Victor, thank you very much for your answers, for your patience, because we've been here 1 hour, so sorry for that.